and welcome to the Heat Check podcast, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat podcast. I'm David Wilson, and I'm joined, as always, on the other line, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. It's Anthony Chang. What's going on, Anthony?
Hello, David. Live from Philly
City of brotherly love.
Thursday's game against the 76ers. So season is winding down. A couple more games left. Things are going well.
Yeah, it's we're very much. I mean, there's obviously, especially out west, some games that are still important seeding wise this week, but we've kind of really hit the teams are trying to play out the string. Well, looking at some of these like tank team rosters, like everyone's trying to get to the finish line right now. The Heat, still do have an outside chance though at getting out of the play-in with 3 games left. They are a game behind the Nets, and don't have the tiebreaker, as you pointed out a handful of times. So need to basically be perfect down the stretch and get a couple breaks, but not totally out of the realm of possibility because, the Nets, not like the Nets are incredible, but been playing, I think, better than people expected. He'd get an important, in that vein, if we're thinking still a possibility of getting out of the play-in, he got an important win on Tuesday night, surviving the Pistons up in Detroit, basically the Jimmy Butler show.
The dangerous Pistons. Yeah.
Let's start there because we don't necessarily get to react to games a ton on this show, although we've done it more lately here down the stretch. I mean, there's not a whole lot to say out of that game. You on Twitter today put a bunch of like Jimmy Butler stats in context. That was the entire story last night, and I think that is, when we look back at the story of this season and Heat fans' frustration with this season, I think a lot of it is tied up in like Jimmy Butler, as we've said and you've written a lot of times, is having like maybe the best season of his career, and what we're gonna get out of this is a play-in and maybe like a first round loss in the playoffs, if that.
Yeah, I mean, look, a win is a win. The Heat need wins. This year's Heat team, like, you can't take anything for granted.
Yes,
they've been mediocre to really look at the numbers.
Bad.
Worse than mediocre.
Yeah, they have a negative point
most of the season. So, but the Pistons had 1 win since the All-Star break.
That's pretty bad.
Win. I think they're 1-21 their last 22, or 1-22 their last 23.
Like unfathomable.
They're an incredible tanking team. Like, they're just so good at tanking.
And Jaden Ivey scored 30 for them last night. Like, they've got to figure it out. I think their one bummer is Cade Cunningham didn't play like at all. Like, they would have liked to have a little bit. See what you got.
Yeah, they held out like more than half of the rotation last night. Jaden Ivey was one of the few that actually played.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's a game that Heat, like, if they wouldn't have won that would have
been like a disaster.
A disaster. So they won. That's important that they avoided that mess. But Pistons were ahead by I think 3 with like 5 minutes left. And Jimmy Butler said, "Okay, now it's time to play." He had one shot attempt in the first half, 2 points. And then he erupts for 25 points in the second half. He has 18 points in the fourth quarter. And then after the Pistons go ahead by 3 with 5 minutes left, the Heat go on a 22-6 run, I believe. And Jimmy Butler scored 16 of those points. So it was very much like a funny Jimmy Butler performance where he was just kind of trolling for the first 3.5 quarters. Then he's like, okay, let's flip the switch here, and just took full control. Mm-hmm. And obviously you can't do that against every team. But it just shows you his greatness. And after the game, Eric Spoelstra didn't say it directly, but hinted at it. And then Jimmy Butler confirmed it after the game that compared him to Dwayne Wade, just with his fourth quarter excellence, just the way he can take control and just flip a switch like that and just basically win the game for the Heat. So again, just Jimmy Butler is the story so far of this season, especially the second half of the season.
Yeah.
He's been sensational, arguably the best player in the NBA over the last few weeks. And last night was just a continuation of that.
Yeah. Again, it's the story of the year. He is incredible and the team is not. Last night was kind of summed it up, right? Like that if it's not for him, they lose to maybe the worst team in the league. But because of him, because he like single-handedly could will them to victory. They won. It's not the best recipe to succeed when we get into the play-in or the playoffs, but it's also not the worst. When you have the best player on the court in most series, although they probably won't in the first round, unless I guess Jimmy Butler versus Jason Tatum is a real argument if that winds up being the series. But for the most part, you're happy to have the best guy in the series.
Yeah, and you mentioned I tweeted some stats today, and these are advanced stats, which I know some people roll their eyes at, but just kind of puts into perspective.
They all agree on the same thing here.
Yeah, he should make definitely an All-NBA team for the third time in 4 years. Probably should make the second team for the first time in his career, because I think he's only made the third team ever. Fifth in estimated plus minus, fifth best in the NBA. Second to Jokic in win shares per 36 minutes. Fourth in value over replacement. Fourth in box plus minus. Seventh in overall Raptor, a metric, the 538's metric. That just everything. All those. You could make the argument he should be first team. He's not going to make first team because the Heat just haven't been that good to warrant that this year. But I have a vote. I think I have to really sit down and kind of do it. But I think that he has a good chance of making the second team, at least for me. He's been that good. And that's with the first half of the year, all of us saying he's not really trying, he doesn't care. He's like taking a bunch of games off. And he's still at this point where he's, by every metric, pretty much been a top 10 player in the league.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned with him taking the first half of the year off, or taking nights off throughout the first half of the year. It's like it's a tricky situation, I think, because they gave away a lot of games. They've given a lot of games away in the second half of the year, but they gave a lot of games away in the first half of the year that, I don't know if Jimmy's sitting there regretting some of it, but at the same time, the other part of that is he's doing that so he can be his best come playoff time. And that worked. He's basically never looked better. He looks similar to what he looked like during some of those great playoff runs, including last year and obviously in the bubble. Now the problem is that they're going to probably be in the play-in and have a big uphill climb to make any noise in the playoffs. And we saw during the bubble year that even as great as Jimmy was, he ran out of gas eventually. And that is, the thing about the Heat the last couple of years is come playoff time, they've let Jimmy become a one-man show, and it has worked to steal games and series at a time. But they've really been able to kind of pace him to get to that point, right? They've been able to, the Bucks series in the bubble. There were a lot of games in that series where Jimmy was scoring 12 points, right? It was it was just a complete domination.
Yeah.
Last year, the Philly series, it's not like Jimmy had to give 110% every night. He could really pick his spots. The problem this team has obviously now is if Jimmy plays like that, we know he's capable of, we've seen him play this year, that he can beat anyone on any night, but can he do that for 4 games in every single series they're going to play? It feels like that's the only way they could win. That's the problem, where they're with not just the fact that they gave away a lot of games that they shouldn't have given away, but just frankly, the team's not that good around him.
Yeah, and he's had to start that quote-unquote playoff Jimmy mode earlier this year.
Yeah, a month left in the regular season, basically.
Yeah, and even then, and we've mentioned this last few weeks, but even with how well Jimmy's playing, they're 10-10 since the All-Star break.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like they're 18-2 or 15-5 or something because Jimmy's just carrying them. Jimmy's been great, but
and again, they're almost losing to the Pistons. They've lost to the Magic. It's not like they're cruising.
Right. It's not like just the way Jimmy's playing has lifted them into a top 5 team in the NBA. They've arguably been worse since the break than they were before. They have the 25th ranked defense since the All-Star break, which is obviously just very uncharacteristic for this team. And if that continues, they might not win a game in the playoffs with one of the worst defenses in the NBA. So there are issues this team is facing for sure. And, the fact that they might be in the play-in is a big one, because even if they get out of the play-in, they probably face Boston the first round.
Right.
Then the second round, you're probably facing Philly, and then you're probably facing Milwaukee in the conference. So that road is just
really tough.
incredibly tough. I mean, if Jimmy pulls that off, he might be Michael Jordan. He might like
yeah,
all of a
you would
sudden
have to
be compared to Michael
be
Jordan.
Michael Jordan. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so much is working against this team right now. I mean, it's good that Jimmy can still do this. That's encouraging. But it's unfortunate that it's coming in a year where the team just hasn't been good, and they really just are still searching for answers, which we're going to talk about now, about like just the rotation and stuff. But they really have just been grasping at straws all year, and that's really continued even in the final week of the season.
Yeah, it's So I guess kind of like on a more like so the recipe obviously has always been defense and Jimmy basically come playoff time. The defense, as you mentioned, has been like the startling thing. But again, we like from the first half of this year, and really more until the All-Star break, which is really like 3/4 of the year.
Yeah, they were fifth best defense.
Yeah, they were really good. How do they get back to that? What and just can they get back to that? Because that's what they have to do, right? They're not going to win by bombing threes on people. They're not going to win by Jimmy and Bam and Tyler taking turns and going mano a mano against everyone, right? The way, and not just because of what they look like this year, but because it has been the recipe when they have, took Boston to 7 games last year, or took the Lakers to 6 games with no one. Like the recipe when the Heat is at its best is when they play great defense and basically let Jimmy win games in crunch time that are close because they're low scoring games. So can the Heat get back to that? What are your, like, what do they need to do to get there?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, right? We've seen it for, like you said, for more than half the year. They were top 5 defense. But, even then, I think we were talking about how a lot of it was the zone defense, right? They're not playing as much zone anymore as they were over that, first 3 quarters of the year. Their man-to-man defense hasn't been good all year, which they've leaned on more, which I think has played a role in kind of the regression on that end of the court. And they rely so much on turnovers. Like Cooper Moorhead from Heat.com always posts this stat of like the team's points per possession on possessions that don't end in the turnover pretty much. So like you just take out the turnovers, and they're one of the worst in the NBA when it comes to that. So like they've been so reliant on turnovers and forcing turnovers. They've been so reliant on zone, using more zone than any other team in the NBA that I don't want to say their defense was fluky in the first half of the year, but it wasn't as solid as the numbers made it seem. I don't think it's as bad as the numbers are making it seem right now, but it's probably somewhere in the middle. But I do think this team can be better defensively, especially in the playoffs when guys are more engaged and maybe you play a shorter rotation and the better defenders play more minutes. But I don't think this is ever going to be like last year's defense where the last year's defense won them games. Like you could rely on it night in and night out. And
there were games in that Boston series that were in the like 90s, basically.
Yeah, or like just shutting. I mean, I guess they could shut down Trae Young, but like just totally like shutting down Trae Young in that first round series, and then making life so hard on Embiid and Harden in the second round. Like that last year's defense was elite. This year's defense can be above average, but it's just alarming because they've been so bad over the last month or so.
You mentioned the rotation, and we've seen some more changes to that in the last week. Again, the constantly evolving Heat rotation that, as we've said a lot of times, Spo can change it in the middle of playoff runs in ways that, a lot of coaches will maybe be like, oh, we'll play fewer bigs in this series, but he'll take, I've said a lot of times, like Kendrick Nunn was like out of the rotation, and then like a Keep Hart during that playoff run, and then back out of the rotation. He does that more than it feels like anyone. No Cody Zeller now is kind of the big tweak. We obviously a couple of injuries. We've seen Kevin Love and Kyle Lowry off the bench last night. Again, a lot of this kind of influenced by injuries and just what they've changed and maybe then kept when guys have returned. What do you make of the current look of the rotation? And I don't want to ask you to predict, like, is this what they're going to look like going to the playoffs? Because it feels like it's changed every week. But if this is what they have going to the playoffs, like, what do you kind of make of what they're doing right now?
I feel like they're trying to build toward the playoffs, right? So you would think that it might look this way.
Right, yeah. So that's it. I mean, that's it. I guess the other thing that goes with everything we're talking about is, like, I think we said this last week too. Like they're probably not going to get out of the play-in. Like these next 3 games should kind of be geared around one, making sure you keep that 7 seed, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
And then 2, like just get ready for the playoffs, right? So
yeah.
Do you think this is the indication they're trying to take into the playoffs? Then
it seems like they're going to at least give it a shot. And then my first takeaway was they're really leaning into the offense. With playing Max Strus up, quote unquote. I guess Jimmy's the power forward technically, but Jimmy and Strus are your power forwards.
And forwards.
Kevin Love is your center off the bench. They're really, really leaning offense and shooting and just spacing for Bam and Jimmy. It's similar to what the Heat did late last year when they started playing like 2 shooters in every lineup. I remember Max Strus moved to the starting lineup, even though I know Duncan was obviously in the starting group and he was a great shooter, but like they kind of went to more spacing around Bam and Jimmy. I think they're trying to do the same thing and just trying to build like the best environment for those 2 guys to succeed offensively. The defense is, with those lineups, the defense isn't going to be as good. Like that's just, you're not playing Victor Oladipo. You're not playing Cody Zeller, who, brings size and rebounding.
Yeah. Better rim protect, better backups. Defensive center than Kevin Love.
Kevin Love. You're not playing Haywood Highsmith. Like you're leaning toward offense, which is interesting. But I don't dislike it. Like I get it, and I think Kevin Love's best minutes have been a backup center. Even like when when people wanted to move him back to the bench, it always made sense for him to play as a center. Like he talked about it this weekend that he felt most comfortable when he was in that role. Because in the starting lineup, he's more of a just spot-up shooter, a guy who just spaces the floor, really doesn't do anything else. In that center role, he's able to post up mismatches, he's able to work in the post, he's able to shoot 3 still, he's able to be, by the basket for offensive rebounds. If you play him and Cody Zeller off the bench together, he's going to be back into that spot-up shooting role. So by playing Kevin Love as the backup center, you're allowing him to show other areas of his offensive game, and I think that's what the Heat are trying to do. It's unfortunate for Cody Zeller because Cody's been solid. He's been really solid, but they're saying they're going to see if this works out, and the numbers bear it out. Like the numbers say, Kevin Love entered last night's game as a -4, I think, overall plus minus, and now after when you take yesterday into account, Kevin Love is a plus 24 in the 65 minutes he's played as a center since joining the Heat. So he's been a big positive in those minutes when he's that small ball 5. So we'll see if that continues. In a series against maybe Boston, it might work, but in a series against Milwaukee, when you're playing Brook Lopez and Giannis, I don't know if that lineup's going to work with Max Strus as your forward, but I guess the Heat have the flexibility where they can adjust based on the matchup.
It kind of flies in the face of what we were talking about, where we were like, the recipe for this team is defense. Is that just like kind of an acknowledgement that it's just this defense is not going to have that ceiling that I think the Heat would hope it has?
I think so. I would never say Eric Spoelstra gave up on the defense because he never will.
He never will.
Like
how many times? We've had so many times we've come on this show and been like, oh, they should just go all in on the shooting, go on the offense, and then by playoff time, the defense is what's carrying them. But
he never will. But I do think it is a signal of like they know that the defense probably isn't good enough to win them games in the playoffs. They're going to need to rely on Jimmy and Bam to really dominate games, especially Jimmy. And how do you get Jimmy in the best possible position to do that? You create as much space as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're trying to do. Again, I mean, when I picked them in a series with Boston, I don't think anybody would.
Yeah.
It's probably like a 5-game series at this point. But as long as you have Jimmy playing at this level, you imagine if the Heat could steal one of the first 2. Doesn't mean they'll win the series, but if they win one of the first 2 after their history with Boston, everything Bill Simmons has been saying about how scared he is of the Heat, like Boston's going to be terrified.
I know.
With Jimmy playing at this level, I don't doubt the Heat stealing a game over there. So
you'll definitely get like Kendrick Perkins or Charles Barkley being like, I think the Heat, they're playing better than anyone right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be scared if I was Boston.
Yeah, so if Jimmy's gonna play at an all-time level, again, you can't rule the Heat completely out.
Yeah, I guess the problem is you got to get to 4 wins, right, in any series, and like I think no matter who you play, there's gonna be one. Again, like there was the Milwaukee series a couple years ago where Jimmy totally no-showed in the playoffs, and
which like 20% from the field or
yeah,
something.
and they got swept. So that is always a possibility, but it doesn't seem like it. You look at the path to 4 wins in a playoff series, you figure kind of no matter who you play, Jimmy alone is going to steal you 1. I think to win a series, he's got to steal you 2. And then, but even then, I don't know where you get the other 2 wins from. Like, I guess, in any series, there can be a game where 3-point disparity is just so great, right? Like, team 8 seeds beat 1 seeds because of that. They lose 5-game series because of that all the time.
Right.
But even then, like, it's hard to see where to get 4 wins from, but you definitely kind of need 2 spectacular Jimmy games probably to get there, no matter who you're playing.
Definitely. I mean, it's hard to see them doing that 4 out of 7 games because they haven't really strung together any consistent stretch all season. So, I mean, that's why they're in the position they're in. Again,
it's the story. The story's been the same all year long. They've tried to move. It's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Yeah. It's not that terrible, but it's it's kind of been like that all year long for the Heat, where they're trying different things and nothing has worked at any point really.
That's why when I say grasping at straws, I just mean like they're
trying things.
They're trying so many different things to see if something sticks, right? Again, even in the final week of the year, like they've changed the starting lineup, they've changed the bench rotation. They're playing 3 guys off the bench, tightened the rotation already. And I think like the easy thing for all of us to say, especially Heat fans, is, well, even as a 7 seed, like none of those top teams want to see the Heat, right? Like the Heat were in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. They basically have the same roster. Jimmy's playing arguably even better than he was last season.
Yeah.
But again, you look at the numbers, and they have the worst net rating of any playoff team, I think, or even any play-in team. They have a negative.
Yeah, negative point. I was looking at like they're like, I think they're the same point differential as like the Wizards, like teams that are like tanking lottery teams. Like
they have the same net rating as the Wizards. Worse than the Jazz, worse than the Timberwolves, worse than the Hawks, worse than the Mavericks, worse than the Raptors, worse than the Thunder, worse than Golden State, like worse than the Bulls. Like again, I'm not saying I would rather face from a team.
Some of those teams.
Rather face the Hawks and the Heat.
Yeah, no.
But the fact is, like, the numbers say they're not a good team. So we're gonna see, if kind of the Jimmy bump maybe changes the perspective on things and changes really the fate or the direction of this team in the final weeks of the in the play-in and then the playoffs.
I have to think the way I can't imagine many teams are scared of the Heat right now. But like you said, if the Heat win game 1 or game 2 on the road,
and Jimmy goes for 40,
all of a sudden, you're like, ugh, we got to deal with this guy again, like, because he's just not fun to play against either, in a way that most guys, even like a guy like James Harden is probably like he's in that similar sort of mold, right, to like Luka or James Harden, where it's just like no matter what you do defensively to him, he is gonna score, but then he's also physical and he's gonna annoy you on defense too. And he's gonna talk trash, like
he's gonna go to the free throw line 15 times.
If they steal one of the first 2 from anyone, I'm not saying any of those teams are gonna panic, but they're gonna be groaning about it. Yeah. Now at the same time, I feel like it's more likely that the Heat get bounced out of the play-in than it is that they make a 7-game series out of whatever first round series they're playing.
I agree with that.
Just again, we've seen them lose back-to-back games to bad teams all year long.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, I think it was 2018 playoffs when the Heat played Philly, and Philly was still had Joel Embiid. They had the Joel Embiid. They had Ben Simmons. I think that was Dwayne Wade's return year to the Heat, and the Heat I think they were like the 6th seed or something like that, and Philly was a 3 seed, had home court, and the Heat stole game 2 because Dwayne Wade went off for 30 points. Oh, and it was oh my God, the Heat are gonna win the series. Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, they can't win in the playoffs. And the Heat lost in 5. I mean, that's kind of what you're talking about. These great players, even Dwayne at that age, late in his career, are good enough to win you 1 game, especially even against a really good team.
Yeah, and like I said, Jimmy might be good enough to win you 2 because he is, like we said, you can make an first-team All-NBA case for him. It's where do you get those other 2 from?
Exactly. It's just so hard to win 4 behind when you're relying on that type of formula.
Yeah. Look, should we finish out with, I guess, some more? I don't know if positive is right because the Heat or because Miami and FAU both lost, but we want to wrap up. We're a basketball podcast here at the Heat Check Podcast, not just a Heat podcast. It's interesting that this is, there's been a lot of talk, obviously, with Udonis Haslem retiring, and Dwayne Wade going into the Hall of Fame. About basketball in South Florida. It's kind of interesting timing for all to be happening at once, where UD is kind of South Florida's biggest basketball success story. It's like him. James Jones is obviously is a GM. I guess you'd put him up there too. In terms of guys who came out of here and became great NBA characters. Obviously, Dwayne Wade is, I think, to a lot of people your age, my age, guys who are maybe playing in college out of Miami now, or even guys in the NBA out of Miami, probably the reason a lot of them played basketball. And then obviously Miami, which interestingly does not have a single player from Florida on the roster, but FAU, who's kind of their leader is one of their vet leaders is Michael Forrest from Blanche Ely. They had a lot more Florida guys on that roster. It was just kind of like a cool, like everything has kind of come full circle, I think, in these last couple of weeks here. I'm very interested to see what this means for basketball at large in South Florida, because this has always been a town that rallies around the Heat. We have never really seen, I think this year is probably the most excited I've seen people get about Miami basketball, even before the Final Four run. Just the crowds there were better than they've been. Obviously, FAU is kind of out of nowhere. But I'll be interested to see. And actually, another component of this is I think there might be 4 South Florida products drafted in the first round of this upcoming NBA draft. So it's kind of like I'm very curious to see what this is like, if we hit a turning point for basketball in South Florida.
I mean, we just had a player from Miami-Dade County named the Gatorade National Player.
Yeah, that's another one, right? Yeah, Cameron Boozer. And they just won they played in one of those national championship tournaments and won that. Columbus High did. So,
I mean, that's former NBA players coming to Miami because Miami's
I was going to say, so it's
city,
kind of funny, but one of the guys, I said there's going to be 4 first-round picks from Miami. Yeah. One of them is Jet Howard, who's Juwan's kid, but still, went to university school. And and actually, the 2 of the other guys grew up in Oakland and moved to Florida in, I think, middle school. The Thompson twins, who are at Overtime Elite. But still, it's that's going to be unprecedented. I don't know if the numbers are available anywhere, but 4 first-round picks from South Florida. I can't imagine that's ever happened before. And obviously, no South Florida team had ever made the Final Four. And the Heat just continue to be the Heat in terms of like their impact locally. But it's a cool moment in basketball here.
Definitely. I think for it's just the fact that Larinaga has been able to have sustained success.
Yeah, that's
right?
the big
like
thing.
That's the big, going to one of the Elite Eight is obviously impressive, but to do Elite Eight, Final Four, and then what? I think they made
a Sweet 16 not that long ago.
Yeah, like they've had a lot of success.
4 Sweet 16s at Miami in like 12 years now, I guess it is.
It's not an outlier anymore. Like, fans have expectations now, and we all know Miami likes a winner, right? And if they think, we saw it during the Final Four run, like people got behind that team.
Yeah.
I was at a sports bar to watch, I think it was a Sweet 16 game against Houston, and all the TVs were on the UM basketball game. Everyone was like wearing UM stuff. Like it was pretty cool. Like I have not experienced that, and I've gone to her like as a kid. I went to Hurricane games.
Yeah.
When like Perry Clark was the coach, and like I would go. Like Darius was it Darius Rice?
Yeah, Darius Rice.
Darius Rice and John Salmons. Like I grew up with those Hurricane teams, but this
Jack
era,
McClinton.
Jack McClinton.
Like Jack McClinton's name is in the rafters there. Like no disrespect to Jack McClinton, who Maryland legend, Baltimore legend. And always used to kill my Terps as a kid because he was angry that they didn't recruit him.
Such a good shooter.
But like that guy's jersey's retired. Like, was he like all conference like once. Like it's
maybe.
Yeah,
right.
like
yeah.
It's kind of it's unheard of. Not just, I mean, FAU got a lot of the attention, obviously, but Miami also didn't have a basketball program for 15 years at one point. Like, but I'm very curious. I think not just what Miami and FAU's crowds are going to be, but like I said, also, every year the NFL draft, how many guys are from South Florida?
Right.
I'm curious how the trickle down, because basketball has always been, the kind of like afterthought a little bit, but
that's the big three
look
effect.
At the
that's the big
athletes
three
we
effect.
have here.
That's the big three effect.
It is.
I really
but
think,
I just wonder, and obviously it's never going to rival football, and it never could, just because of one, how many different like types of people can be good at football, and obviously the size of the rosters, and then also just history. But like, a place that produces great football players should also be able to produce great basketball players. And I'm just, there's a lot, like you said, a lot of people who probably never cared about the NCAA tournament cared about it this year, and that all just goes into, and if you're the Heat, like obviously how many consecutive years of sellouts, they've got a ton right now, but like eventually there are going to be people who don't remember LeBron and Wade who you need buying tickets, and it's important to have people care about the sport, I think, in all components, not just because LeBron played here for 4 years.
So you're saying this is a basketball town now?
Basketball town. I'm saying I want it to be a basketball town.
I really do think, like, not just, and I'm not even going to say the Dwayne Wade influence, because that's more people like my age, I would say.
Yeah, I mean,
there was the big three era that really, like, that era.
Yeah,
you're seeing those kids
that
were like, like 8, like in the formative years, 7, 8 years old watching those games, and now they're, seniors in high school. Like that, I think made a difference in like the basketball culture down here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it starts with Dwayne, and like I said, UD is kind of precedes it. I mean, obviously that Miami High team he played for was one of the best teams in the country. So it's not like we haven't had great basketball down here in South Florida, but it's never. I mean, it's a shame the Heat are having such a disappointing year, because if not, it would be this, 2 teams in the Final Four. Like I said, Columbus High just, can take a claim at a national championship right now. Heat not holding up their end of the bargain. Probably the first time we've ever said that.
Yeah, you never know though, Jimmy. Jimmy might carry them to.
I mean, and again, the Heat, there's some Heat fans out there who are 10 years old who don't remember the big three, but Jimmy Butler is pretty fun to watch. So the Heat do a good job, obviously, of that, but it's cool to just see it. The Heat have always done a good job of building a big fan base, obviously, but we're more of a holistic basketball town, I think, right now than ever before, which is a good thing.
No doubt. You can't argue that. 2 teams in the Final Four in South Florida. Again, like you said, Columbus basically winning a state champion, a national title. Have the best player in the country in the class of 2025, and Cameron Boozer. Yeah, I mean, basketball's on the rise for sure.
Yeah,
down here.
All right. Let's wrap things up there. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chang. He will be in the building for Heat Sixers on Wednesday night. Then over to Washington, right? Is that where that road trip finishes up?
Be in Washington, yep.
And then the season finale, obviously, on Sunday against the Magic. Heat pretty much have to be perfect if they want to get out of the play-in game, or out of the play-in round. So we will see. If not, we'll be back next week to, I guess, when would the play-in be?
Tuesday, April 11th.
Tuesday. So we'll be back, I guess, to recap the play-in potentially next week. Or to preview first round if they, because I guess if they win the play-in, then we would also do a first round preview. So we'll be back next week to talk about some playoff basketball.
Yeah, either to preview the first round of the series if they win on Tuesday, if they're in the play-in, or to recap, sound the alarms and say,
because I guess when would the second one be? Thursday. Would be Tuesday, Thursday. So we'll have an interesting episode next week, no matter what happens. Thanks as always for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.